Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Terry Norman. Paul, thank you for that introduction. Yeah, my name's Terry Norman. I'm an independent consultant, and I'm going to be moderating this panel today, the perfect storm question mark. I mean, I don't know. I suppose I might challenge that myself, really. But I suppose implicit in this perfect storm metaphor is this idea that the convergence in machine-to-machine communications, Internet of Things, next generation mobile communications, 5G, is not only going to bring about a massive increase in the type and traffic, but also a large number, an unprecedented number of vulnerabilities in terms of attack vectors and issues of security. We've got a panel today, a great panel, to help us try to understand some of the more subtle points within all of this. I'm going to introduce them one by one and bring them on, I hope. We've got, first of all, and in no particular order of precedence, it's just the way that their names came out on the email trail. Remy Harel, Orange, Innovation Head of Security and Interception for Networks SIN team. Good afternoon, Remy. Or is it good morning for you?
In fact, it's it's noon, so I guess both work. Hello, everyone.
And the next panelist is Bechara, and please forgive me, guys, if I make a mess of your names, but Bechara Kaddoum, Telefonica, Global Solutions, Strategic Account Manager, Cybersecurity, Europe, Middle East and Africa, and Asia Pacific. Is that right? That's quite a big area.
Correct. Good afternoon, Terry. Yeah, it's a huge scope.
quite a big area. I bet you travel around a lot. I used to do anyway. I don't know.
Yeah, used to.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now, sorry, I cut across you there. Yeah, we've got the third panelist is Martin Beauchamp. He's a senior security analyst at the GSMA. Hi, Martin.
Hi there. Afternoon, everyone.
Afternoon. We've got Jason, who you've just been talking to, of course, Jason Longley. He's the technical lead or a technical lead at Palo Alto Networks. Please correct me, guys, if I've got your names, titles, or whatever wrong, roles and responsibilities. Hi, Jason.
Hello.
And the final panelist is Alessandro Bovone. Is that right, Alessandro Bovone? Is that right?
Yeah, no, that's fine, Terry. It's Alessandro Bovone and from Nokia.
Okay, you're outside too. And he's CX CTO at Nokia North and West Europe. Is that right?
Correct, Terry.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the introduction I gave was kind of like this idea that modern 5G and Industry 4.0 and all of these new innovations are going to bring about a whole range of new services and a fantastic, interesting, and exciting future for us all. But implicit in that is the elephant in the room question of security, which some say has been dealt with very well, and others say is probably being ignored as the poor relative of this particular issue. And I want to explore some of those issues. Please forgive me if I look like I'm reading off my notes, but I am. So I want to explore some important issues in this. I want to really, one of the things I want to consider is whether 3GPP 5G is doing enough to manage the issue of security being done at the level of standardization. And I also want to think about this idea of convergence and its implication for traditional contracts and service level agreements. So certainly the first one is not necessarily perhaps an unusual question, but I hope the second and possibly the implications that has for network operator responsibilities is something a little bit novel, and therefore we can get our teeth into that a little bit. So without further ado then, and I mean, I suppose the best way to do this is to kind of give you all a bite at the cherry, really, mindful of time, of course, give you all a bite at the cherry. And so the first one is that 3GPP standards, they concern themselves with defining the functional elements of networking interfaces, really. They're not overly preoccupied with implementation. That's largely left to the vendor, the operator, the infrastructure provider. And they're inevitably guided by operational economic considerations. So whether or not certain functions might be implemented, how they might be done physically or through virtual machines and so on. this creates a whole range of possible deployment scenarios, and none of them are. There's no standard way of doing it. My first question is: does this mean that it will be almost impossible to create a standardized security implementation sort of best practice scenario or set of scenarios? So if we could kick that off, Remy, and or indeed, if anybody wants to feel strongly about it, if they want to come in. But Remy, if we could start with you, because your name's top of the list at the minute.
Yeah, sure. I really think 3GPP did a really great work for 5G security, and I really think it's the first generation of mobile networks that is actually secured by design. However, like you said, there are still a lot of room for implementation. There are also a lot of options, but I do feel like it's the right way to do it, because 5G is extremely complex, and we have a lot of countries with different laws, different business models, different economics. So I think it's normal to have differences. So each operator can adjust the level of security he wants in accordance with the regulation and his business model. So I think it's great. We have the options. We just have to choose accordingly and to discuss with our vendors to have the level of security we desire for 5G.
Can I sort of throw in a corollary question as well at that point, and maybe the others might want to pick up on this too as well? I mean, do you think it really is going to create this perfect storm opportunity for attack, or do you think it's going to be largely business as usual, which, as we heard from Jason before, is not exactly great, because there are problems with that, but nevertheless.
Well, I'm not exactly a weather forecast guy, but regarding storms, I can say that one thing can vouch for that. We have a lot of new use cases, a lot of devices connected. So yeah, I think we have things that could introduce storms or things like that. But on the other hand, we have so many new defense mechanisms, and we are focused on security right at the beginning. So I think maybe we are bracing for the storm. I don't know, but it's a good thing to be aware that we could have a storm and prepare for it. And I think it's what we are doing. But yeah, I think it might come to a storm between all the IoTs and so on.
Bechara, do you want to pick up on this idea of whether or not the new world is going to create a rash of attacks upon networks and services? What's your thoughts on that? And then we'll go back to this point about whether we can actually deal with it in any standardized way.
Sure, Teddy. I think it's hard to predict, but we can see nowadays, even with COVID and people becoming more connected, businesses being more connected, we are seeing a huge growth in attacks. So the more we are connected, the more we are having attacks vectors, and the more attackers will be trying to look for information and so on. And as Remy was mentioning now, we will have billions of IoT devices connected. Some of them might be from manufacturing or power plants or from critical infrastructure, transportation. There is a lot of data there that will be collected from users. And I believe that this 5G will definitely give us the possibility to be more connected, but at the same time, definitely the landscape or the threat landscape will be extremely and exponentially growing. Going back to the question of the standardization at some point, I think 3GPP has done a great job to start, but I believe that similar to any of the cybersecurity regulations that we are having nowadays, it takes a huge amount of money to make a standardization that is quite secure, as well as we need to have several institutions, several laws to be working, several communities to be working in order to try to protect as much as possible. But I think it's a perfect start. Like, at least we have something to start with.
Mm-hmm. But do you think, though, that the range of deployment scenarios which will be possible, and the different ways in which operators might implement their network, whether it be through virtual means or physical, creates such a variety of deployment scenarios that it's almost impossible to legislate in any kind of way for standardization of approach? So it has to be done almost on a case-by-case basis, maybe. I don't know. I'm really asking that question, genuinely.
I think, yeah, from my perspective, I think it's true. It's never the perfect scenario, I think, in technology, and especially in cybersecurity. We can definitely close the network and make everything happening like super secure, but at some point, this is not user experience. The more you're getting user experience, speed, these kind of things, at some points, you need to give best practices. Would operators follow the best practices? I would say yes, but we need to keep in mind the economical barrier that they might have. So as well, we need to think from a business perspective, and hopefully, probably not the big telcos wouldn't be, or big operators wouldn't face this problem, but we might face it in small operators. So they will need to come out with the innovation or the way where they need to configure in a different way or try to create a different architecture considering their network. And it's where I think the human error will be a fact, which might cause some troubles. And that's from my perspective.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to ask Martin pretty much the same questions now. It's getting somewhat predictable, isn't it? Ask Martin the same questions and go down the line. But Martin, what's your view then on from this GSMA
thanks,
point of view about whether or not, are we walking into the perfect storm? Is it going to be the nightmare scenario that some of the naysayers would have us believe?
So, with any technology change, you gain a lot of new capability, new interfaces, new implementations, and that in its very nature does cause new security attack opportunities to be created. So if we think about 5G and more virtualized infrastructure, for example, where previously there may have been a reliance on a single vendor to implement the whole top to bottom security build of a given product, as we move to more virtual network functions and cloud native functions operating on virtualized infrastructure and maybe a private or public cloud infrastructure, there's naturally 2 or 3 or more vendors involved where previously there were 1. So there's kind of a new challenge to make sure that systems integration happens from top to bottom. All the products, I'm sure, will be really great security, but there's a job there to implement that kind of top to bottom security so that it works as a whole. So you see that playing out. And there's also perhaps a more explicit use of open source software. I don't see that necessarily as being a bad thing. It's just different from a proprietary software build that has its own advantages as well as.
I've got a specific question later on about that, actually. So
cool. So we'll come back to that. In terms of standards and definition, I think I'd agree with the earlier comments. I think 3GPP have done a great job, signaling and interconnect security through the definition of new capabilities, such as the security edge protection proxy, which kind of builds in a step change in interconnect and signaling security that's long been needed. So those are there and being specified, and I think we've got a lot of the other tools that we need to build and protect modern infrastructure. We've got information sharing analysis, so we can share threat information as new threats emerge. Coordinated vulnerability disclosure schemes, there's a whole range of sort of tools and techniques that the industry sort of developed and known and love over the previous technology generations that kind of work. The challenge, as ever, is in implementation and making sure that we implement those things. And
I guess that's the point, really. You know, I'm perhaps a bit long in the tooth now, but I've seen this a few times, and you know, the more complex it becomes, the more people draw Occam's razor through it. You know, and they just try to deal with it in a very simplistic way. So, ideally, we would have a sort of a standardized approach to securing networks, but it seems like that's becoming less and less likely. So just kind of from the GSMA point of view, do you think that means that operators might start to ignore security because it's just simply too difficult?
So absolutely not. I think there's too much experience and too much to lose if we don't. It's not just down to standards, though, is it? So international standards will get us so far. I think every operator will adopt a layered defence approach. So they'll certainly specify and use equipment developed to international standards, be that 3GPP or O-RAN Alliance, for example. But they're built on top of that with a whole bunch of additional security layers that are appropriate to their installation, their legacy equipment, their installed base, and their new installation. So, you know, they'll apply industry best practice on top of that. There are increasing national regulations that we're seeing, for example, in the UK, telecom security requirements about saying what explicitly what good security looks like. Then you've got company security practices on top of that build from that corporate knowledge and legacy information. And you can then do sort of risk-driven bespoke controls on top of that. So I think, you know, we know the approaches. It's about working through and actually doing those and maintaining them.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Jason, I'm going to move on to you now, and thank you, Martin, for your response there. So, what's your thoughts on this idea of a perfect storm? Are we walking into a nightmare? Is this all going to happen? And you know, are all the opportunist thieves and criminals out there just rubbing their hands with glee, waiting for 5G to come online so that they can make an absolute fortune at our expense? Or is it just going to be business as usual? It seems to be from your presentation. Yeah, they're going to make a fortune at our expense, but it won't necessarily be because of this 5G perfect storm.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting question. So the elements, I believe, for the perfect storm are there. We need to learn from the past and adopt good security practice. So if we look, the 3GPP have done a fantastic job at pulling together standards that GSMA essentially came up with the wish list for. The challenge is that security, and the enemy of security, as we said earlier, is complexity and change. And if you look to see how much change has happened with the standards, how many standards and sub-standards and changes 5G has actually brought in, and then the wholesale change from all of the protocols that were proprietary to mobile. And now we're seeing REST APIs, we're seeing HTTP, we're seeing virtualization. That change is quite significant. From a standard perspective, standards are quite difficult to read. And we obviously, you know, there's challenges, there's threats that can be inserted just from a standard maybe having a little bit of a hole in it. And we saw that from the network slicing thing, which will be fixed in release 17, to my understanding. But then when you get developers writing billions of lines of code, potentially pulling in open source from GitHub, etc., you're going to introduce some security challenges. Here's a data point. So we tested in a lab of a service provider, a large mobile vendor's 5G MEC. We found over 10,000 vulnerabilities within that implementation. So we were using our Prisma Cloud Compute solution for that, which basically looks at a few things. It's a cloud security posture manager. So it's there looking to see if you've implemented your virtual machines, your Kubernetes containers correctly, and all of the rights are properly there. But it also looks at the workload protection and see if there's any vulnerabilities in the code that's running there. So to address that, So this is a security good practice, is you want to catch those challenges earlier on in the cycle of development. So in your CI/CD pipeline, your DevOps bit of development, you would want to shift left, as we call it, and actually set guardrails. So when you're pulling down the source code from GitHub, it will check to see if there are any known vulnerabilities, check to see if you're not encrypting your S3 buckets in AWS, for instance. But then, of course, when we look further down the line in terms of implementation, skill sets, and of course the move to potentially putting customer workloads and applications in the cloud, that again creates another challenge. So to kind of come up with a succinct answer, I think all of the elements are there to create a real security problem. Service providers are most likely going to focus on protecting their own infrastructure and not the customer's workload, unless they're going to get paid for that. Why would they? It's a shared risk model. And I think as we move on, we will see an awful lot more focus on security, because there has been a huge race to getting operational capability for 5G, and maybe the security has fallen back a bit.
Sorry, I'll just get my questions back up. It seems like you are kind of hinting there that there might be a benchmark approach to security. You know, you talked about shift left and so on, checking software as it's being implemented rather than after the event. But how are you going to? How is that idea going to be communicated to the operators and their implementation partners?
Yeah, so we're actively working with service providers, and we're actively working with vendors to basically talk to them about this challenge. So the vendor in question, who should remain anonymous, is very, very keen to adopt that shift left approach and to actually bring on board the Prisma Cloud Compute that will allow them to check before they actually ship this shrink wrap mech, which is basically what they were doing for the service provider, to their customer, because it was in the lab, they thought it was ready to go. But there are standard security policies. If we look back, what's a good security practice? If you're looking on the control plane, what elements, what service functions should be allowed to talk to what other service functions? What's normal, what's not normal? And then, you know, the challenge with 5G is it's potentially very elastic. So when we look at that, what does that mean? Well, it means that your poor security operations team could be receiving tens of millions of alerts or logs into the security incident event manager and not know how to deal with them, and they won't know what it looks like. So that's when AI and machine learning comes in, and the ability to enrich all of those events coming in and just pull out the key incidents and cut down the actual amount of workload. So I see there's an awful lot of different bits of work that need to happen, some of which is within the SP infrastructure in the production network, some is actually on the over the top in terms of management and security operations.
Okay. Thank you, Jason. Alessandro, what would Nokia's view be on this idea of whether or not the perfect storm is on the horizon, and if so, does it have implications in terms of how one might approach a benchmark mechanism for securing networks?
Well, Terry, listen to the other one. I think that I can just only say that we have definitely seen in the past the challenges coming from standardization and so on. In particular, if I recall back 3G and 4G, yes, the security was there, but wasn't at the level that was required at the time. And we had a lot of discussion. I remember a lot of follow-up in standardization in bringing a new security, I would say, update of whatever was the standard that was applied to the LTE network, for example, and so on. 5G, as somebody said at the beginning, I think it was Remy, is now really designed for security. He has a lot of the element of the security that we expected before, so we have learned, so that means we are moving in the right direction. Is perfect? No, probably, because security moves continuously, so we'll never stop. Security never stops, so this is the point. And what we do, part of 5G implementation and so on, is definitely apply all the security on the function of the interface and so on, so the product and so on. The point is, in most of the cases, the security challenges that we see, and I think was mentioned by or Martin or Jason before also, probably Martin, there was some discussion as well, But the fact is, it's not the 5G itself sometimes that is the problem in terms of security. If I look at the cloud core, 5G core element that now everybody deploy on a virtualized or containerized now solution, the problem on security that we have to pay attention, and we are working on that and so on, is not with the function itself and the interfaces, but it's with the Kubernetes, for example, how you secure the Kubernetes platform. So what is the underlying infrastructure that you use that needed to be secure? So that means the 5G bring complexity, but at the same time, it bring quite good things in terms of security. And in terms of implementation, we as vendor, of course, we develop, we try to be always on top of the game. The security of the product is always there, the security of the solution. In most of the cases, what I have seen also in the past is how the implementation is managed by the operators itself. In most of the cases, the security challenges that we have is not around our product or our solution, is around how we configure or we interconnect it to, for example, the legacy equipment, to the network that is already in existence. Or in other cases, I remember in LTE, if you remember, IPsec was available in LTE, but only few operators they start to use IPsec when it was available. So that means a lot of network today they still don't use IPsec on LTE, and because 5G now is mandatory to use and so on, has changed a bit the dynamic of the deployment. So it's a lot of different things that we needed to talk. Security is coming. Security is not something static that when you do security, you tick the boxes, say it's done. It's continuous in evolution. So we have always to keep an eye, and we have always to upgrade. It's very good that the government and so on, they send the new messages of security, that requirement that they want. In my area, that is the North and Baltic region, UK and Ireland and so on, I see many of these from UK, from Norway and so on. It's all good, needed to be applied, and need money, and need budget allocated. And it's something that maybe the guys from Orange and Telefonica, they can comment more than me, but from an operator perspective, it's always difficult to find budget for security. Because for some aspect, you expect that security come with what you buy already from day one. But it's not always the case, because we just discussed that the security has many different phases. So is a perfect storm? Well, it's an opportunity also. Is a challenge. We had in the past, we'll have more challenges because we have the IoT, we have the machine and all the other stuff connected. But I don't see this one becoming the kind of challenge that we cannot solve and will be a storm, will be all taken by surprise and we don't know what to do. As everything, we'll have to work very close, vendors, supply chain, operators, regulatory, and continue to improve, continue to do what is the best and the kind of applicable at the time that we do deployment on the network, in the way that we know that we have done as much as we could. If something happens, we'll be there to try to solve again. But it's no static things, it's dynamic. So yeah, we'll have always to keep an eye.
Thank you. You raised a really good point there, and that is that, you know, everything costs money. And it is a question I wanted to ask. And you know what, I'll just fire that to the panel now as a quick question, if you can, top to bottom, Remy, Bechara, Martin, Jason and Alessandro. Do you think that a kind of a payment model might evolve where operators will expect customers to actually make a contribution to the cost of security and thereby get enhanced security on their particular communication? Remy?
Well, I
try and
think,
make it brief if we can, because we need to shoot through some questions. Kind of yes or no, really.
To make it brief, I think we can have maybe small increase, global increase of the subscription for residential customers because they are more and more careful about security, but they do not want to pay extra. So maybe if it's 2 or 3 euros more, they will say, okay, it's fine, it's for my security of my data, but I don't think a dedicated option will have a lot of success for residential customers. But for B2B and business customers, I think when they have sensitive data and they really want to protect the confidentiality and the integrity of the data, yes, I think they will pay because their activity, their business is totally worth it.
Bechara, Telefonica's view.
Yes, no, I agree with Remy on this regard. I think B2B or businesses in general are more keen to pay for that. I think when it comes to the B2C part, I was telling last year to some of my colleagues, I think cybersecurity will become a public good soon, especially 5G is accelerator for becoming a public good. So for the time being, probably will be included within the subscription of the telcos. But I think very soon we will start having it part of the governmental contributions, because that's the only way to protect all what you need to. One of them is the 5G and their connected devices.
Martin, does the GSMA, thank you, sorry, Bechara. Martin, does the GSMA have a view on this? Is this something you've discussed with your members that you could share publicly?
So I'd agree with the earlier comments, really. I think from a consumer operation, I don't see a great opportunity for incremental security revenue on top. I think there'll be an expectation of a baseline good level of security, and we see governments intervening to kind of specify, I mentioned earlier some of the UK interventions to specify what good looks like. And so, you know, there's very little choice in that. Over and above that, it's a cost versus benefit decision influenced by, you know, individual companies' risk appetite. They absolutely, though, want to have a good enough security to protect their customers, protect their brand. And there's increasingly, you know, pretty big governmental regulations with some, you know, some nasty fines if we don't. So kind of there's a stick and a carrot approach.
So there's some motivation there, and it's definitely not off the table as a consideration then, as an option. Sure, okay. So I'm kind of going to Nokia and Palo Alto, if you don't mind, just keep that one with the operators and the GSMA. But what I want to do now is have a broader sort of discussion for the last probably about 10 minutes or so on this idea that in order to reduce costs, improve time to market, use of off-the-shelf software, components, license-free software, and so on, is being included more and more in vendors' offerings. Again, does this make the service more vulnerable to attacks? And I know that Palo Alto certainly have a view on this. You've already talked about how you might deal with that. Perhaps we'll start with Alessandro. What are vendors doing to ensure off-the-shelf software and components that they incorporate are safe to use? And realistically, is there much they can do? You know, this is a moving feast, as you've already alluded to, Alessandro. Yep. It's not a static thing, it's dynamic all the time. It's changing day by day, never mind. How are they going to keep up with it? How are they going to deal with it? And how do they assure their customers, which is the operators, that they've done it?
Yeah. I think, if I may, from a point of view of our product solution, we always update constantly what we do in terms of design for security of all our product. We take always the best practices that are available at the time. And of course, it means that at the time it could be 1 year ago and now is implemented. So maybe now, if you look at the market, has already changed, but it's the normal cycle of life of product development, innovation, and after deployment. Also, for everything is now open source and so on that come in fruition, and all of us, all the vendors now, we use more and more open source. We have strategically build units that they are able to check and control all the software that we take in, part of our product for security. Again, we do all this one when we started our building of the product. Of course, in 12 months' time, when the product will be out and so on, we need to review and check that what we have planned 12 months ago is still, the right, and is not superseded by the event. This is why I say we need always to be there and continue to update. We spend a lot of time on that. the unfortunate thing is that sometimes we enter in a discussion with operator and so on around the specific of each country that they want to do in a different way and so on. It is going to take away resources from what is the intent to provide security globally. We need to spend more time to satisfy, I would say, sometimes minor security requirement that they come to us, but for an operator, maybe they are the most important things in the world that we can understand because it's a customer for us. The customer is always right. But sometimes I think we need to do a bit of my culpa to check if what we ask is really important or not, and not just ask for everything because it's good to have everything. So we are defining this direction. Design for security is embedded in all the stuff that we are doing. We'll have still challenges, yes, and we'll have still a discussion going, yes. But from the vendor perspective, as Nokia, we are doing as much as we can all the time to ensure that we align with everything is the best practice. As I said, at the moment that we start the development, and after that, during the development, we change and we review and so on. But always, because it's dynamic, we need to ensure that we always keep update. We succeed all the time, hopefully. I would say most of the time. As everybody, no one can say 100% of the time. Sometimes we have to go back and sometimes maybe back on the drawing board and change the maybe solution that we wanted to do because of security concern, and that's fine. But again, needed to be understood from the market. All this one as a cost doesn't come free.
Yeah.
And this cost needed to be picked up by somebody. I appreciate that before your question around can maybe subsidize something from the consumer part, enterprise part of operator. I think it's something that the operator, they probably some of them, they start already, from what I can see, start to think about that, more the enterprise sector than the consumer. But hey, something needs to be done because nothing comes for free.
What about, and just briefly, if you can, on this one, what about the installed base of machine-to-machine equipment? And, you know, as we move to Industry 4.0, one of the real applications, if you like, of 5G killer apps, if you want to call it that, you know, there's a lot of equipment out there that's not been tested, that's been out there for decades. And then you're going to bring that on board. A, how are you going to make sure it's secure? B, is it your responsibility as the vendor? Is it the operator's responsibility? Whose responsibility is it? Where do the lines of demarcation lie? So I know that's a big question, but maybe I'm going to move. I'll give you a quick sort of bite at that one if you can, then, Alessandro, and then move on, because I'm just mindful of the time. I've got 5 minutes, I think, to 10 minutes to get through this.
Yeah. No, you are completely right. It's a gray line and not very defined. So you don't know if it's on one or the other side. I would say, from my experience, and I come experience from the operator side as well, I think this one is most of the time in the operator domain, because the operator that has really to ensure that whatever is the legacy is on board in the new platform correctly, is secure. How much security you can do on the legacy? Well, this is the question mark. In some cases, some M2M and so on devices that are on the network, you can't do anything. And the only thing that you can do is go and swap it, but in some cases it's not possible because the contract or because the customer on your side doesn't want to do that.
All right, I'm going to kick that straight over to Remy and Bechara then. So we'll start with you, Remy. Do you share that view, that the installed base is the operator's responsibility? And if so, how are you going to negotiate your way through that minefield? Is it service level agreements, contracts and things like that, or what?
Well, I think it depends on what we are talking about. If we are talking about network equipment, yeah, I think it's our responsibility. I think it's a joint responsibility with the vendor. But we can discuss about devices. We don't have the control over devices. It can be jailbreaked and so on. But network equipment in our premises, yes, we have some responsibility, and with the vendor. The problem is we have often obsolete or old operating systems. We are not very keen to pay for all equipment. The vendor either. So it might be a bit of a problem. But on the other hand, it's been here for quite long, and I think we've secured we've secured them already, okay. But
I'm going to let Bechara and Martin have a go at that as well, if you don't mind, Remy. But thank you for that. Bechara, would you like to have a quick, say, 2-minute go at that one? And
yes, sure. I believe at some points, telcos nowadays, they are more concerned about cybersecurity. At the same time, shared responsibility, I would say it's shared responsibility definitely as everything we have in cybersecurity or within our network with the vendor. But I believe that there would be a third party as well that will be sharing this responsibility with us. It's not only the telco that will be in front of the customer. At some points, we will definitely give it to insurance companies. We will definitely try to get some associations on board in order to share this responsibility with them when it comes to legacy softwares. I think that's how it goes, because at some points, as I mentioned at the beginning, the constraint that you have from economical perspective on the telcos, we are moving generations. We can see that we have a lot of economical problems when we move from 3G to 4G to 5G, as well when we move from a technology to another. There is a huge investment there and we need to make it as efficient as possible. So I think nowadays telcos, and especially in the cybersecurity space, we are trying to think from a perspective to keep our back safe while we are doing any implementation. At least that's my perspective.
Okay, thank you. So Martin, what's your sort of take on this idea of managing the legacy, if you could, in 30 seconds?
So it's a really broad question, isn't it? So it depends entirely, I think, on the contracting model as to who's the systems integrator, who's the lead vendor. Obviously, operators come to this with a huge amount of operational experience and wide area connectivity experience, so they're well placed to kind of respond to that. But it kind of depends on the shared model and the contracting model. No one wants any of that to fail, so everyone's going to go into it with the right outlook, I think.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to take some questions from the floor now. I don't know if they've started to come through yet, so just bear with me a minute and I'll just check. I think there's one from question. How do you handle the interfaces to legacy equipment and product? I think we've just done that, the SS7 POTS, which have inherent vulnerabilities. I think we've done that. Somebody's asking, what's the future of Google verified SMS? I'm not sure that I understand that question. Does that make sense to you guys, or anybody want? No. We don't seem to have had many other questions from the floor, actually. So,
Harry, I would just comment back on the question about interfacing and sort of interconnection.
Thank you.
Yeah, because I mentioned some of the new capabilities defined in 3GPP that address that. They will absolutely need to coexist with SS7, signaling system number 7, LTE signaling as well. I think the thing is, although those protocols have some security weaknesses, we kind of know what we've got to do. Those have been heavily specified in some of the GSMA documents, for example, as to how to interconnect, what to allow, what to block, what to configure, and capabilities such as signaling firewalls. It's a matter of implementing those. Well, being aware of them and then implementing them and maintaining that capability. I think we know a lot of the answers. We just got to do it.
But again, it's back to cost, though, right? If somebody's doing it, it's time and resource that's being deployed, and if an operator has been asked to take on board a whole host of legacy equipment, then I would imagine that the operator will have something to say about that in terms of the contract that they're setting up, and
absolutely,
indeed who's going to pay for it, because it's not going to be done for free. But you say that the wherewithal is there to actually deal with that.
Yeah, I believe so. I think there'll always be a cost benefit, and everyone will always do their best to invest with the best return on a limited pot of investment. So active risk management, knowing where the weaknesses are, knowing where the next thing that you will invest in, doing a penetration test for live operational networks to kind of evidence existing weaknesses so that you can use that then to build an investment case for new security features. The capabilities are there.
I see Bechara's nodding his head there as well. Jason, can I bring you in on this kind of the installed base, the legacy equipment issue?
Yeah.
Would like to have a
I'll just carry on from Martin, if I may. So FS11, FS21, some of the excellent documents that outline security standards for signaling and best practices for both network and application firewalling really outline what needs to be done. So the second part of that question is, well, why would a service provider do it? And I think all of the service providers I've known really treat their brand identity. They put an awful lot of money into it, and they treat it with kid gloves. If there's ever an outage or if there's ever any negative publicity, a lot of the service providers will actually attribute that activity, that breach, that outage, and see how much brand damage was done. Given that SMS is used as two-factor authentication for banking services in some parts of the world, there was in Germany a situation whereby the SS7 network was subverted, and an SMS for two-factor authentication for a bank was sent to a burner phone, and I think about 40 bank accounts got siphoned of all of the funds. That's clearly something that is negative towards that service provider and would lead them to want to actually invest in securing up their legacy environment. And then when we look at stir and shaken kind of technologies that are all about making sure the caller ID that turns up on your phone is actually the real caller ID and not someone purporting to be it by modifying the SS7 capabilities. Clearly, it's in the service provider's interest to adopt these latest security capabilities within the signaling environment.
Okay, so I think we're kind of bringing it to a conclusion there, really. I mean, it was very positive and very useful discussion that we had there. In terms of 5G, I think we all agree that there's been a massive step forward in terms of security. It's been a build upon a build, and standards are to be congratulated for that. I think it's well recognised that there are going to be opportunities and challenges in the future in terms of security, not least amongst them because of the large number of the interconnection, if you like, of the communications network is now extending its reach to an extent where it's creating a large number of attack vectors and opportunities for bad actors. There's going to be challenges for sure with the legacy installed base, particularly as we move to Industry 4.0. So there's going to be some real challenges in the future, but the operators and the vendors are up for it. And they are getting their head around it at the moment, and let's just see how that all pans out. But the bottom line is nothing comes for free, and it's going to cost, and we all need to take that on board. It's not going to be, oh, business as usual, we'll do exactly the same subscriptions we had before. If we want enhanced security, if we want to deal with these issues, somebody's going to have to sort it out, and it's not going to be on the backs of the operators. So, and not unreasonably, it's not going to be on the backs of the operators. So I hope that was a reasonable summary, and I thank you all very, very much. And I think I'll hand back over to MEF now. I think I've done that all right. I'm not entirely sure that I have. But thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.